I'm happy to be here. So thanks for logging in and listening. So I'll just introduce myself a little bit more because that is actually one of my strategies that I'll talk about later. But yeah, I'm Natalie Hoffman. I'm from Seattle, born and raised. I did live on Guam for a little bit. I work at a company called Sustainable Business Consulting, and they actually do bridge building work of working with between business and sustainability mostly. So it's really awesome to be able to put this into work in my job. Yes, I wrote this book with Kevin Wilhelm, and some of my hobbies, I really enjoy swimming, play water polo, and actually 11, Rebel 11, 11 is my lucky number, was my water polo number. So I feel a really good connection there with Rebel 11. And other than that, I like to write music, write songs on my guitar. So that's me. And Joni, as Joni mentioned, there's a lot of division in America, in the world right now. It's all the way from huge topics like politics, climate change, economy, also down to now coronavirus, Black Lives Matter, masks, and more and more and more. We're increasingly finding more reasons to disagree. And there's just a lot of shouting across the aisle and not a lot of listening. So we wrote this book to try and solve that at least a little bit, take a step in the right direction. And in our book, we have a lot of very practical strategies. So whether it's communication strategies or actual examples of win-win solutions that help bring people together, that's kind of what our book's all about. So I'll go through a few of those strategies and a few of those examples with you and give you an idea of how you might be able to put it into your life. Yeah, so the first one that I will talk about is connect on a personal level. So we all ultimately, believe it or not, want the same things. We want a healthy family, we want a safe community, we want a successful job, and it's more on how we get there that we get caught up. Let's say on gun violence, for example, we all want to be safe, but some think less guns will get us there and some think more guns will get us there. But we have to start from that kind of foundational aspect, that shared aspiration, before we can jump into the how, the why, the how to get there. So connecting on a personal level is really important because you can first, if you talk about its shared aspirations, you can also talk about things that you like, your hobbies. So if someone else here likes swimming, we can connect on swimming. Let's say you really like yoga or hiking, just to put something out there that you might like. If you talk about yoga or hiking before you talk about these other topics, it's gonna be way easier to talk to people because you'll have that foundation of respect. You'll establish that first, and then once you have that, you want to listen to what they're going to say. You actually care about what they're going to say. You're not just putting up a wall, and same to them. They're not putting up a wall and just closing their ears to any opinion that you have. So that's a really good first step. Another strategy is to listen, which is something that is way harder than it sounds. We're definitely all told to listen as children, but you know, we don't always do that. And I also have been working on this for my whole life. But one example of this is what the American Prairie Reserve did in Montana. So I'm sure you've heard about the conflict between rural Americans, kind of ranchers and farmers, and wildlife. So wildlife corridors go through their farmland, or, you know, and eat their cows or trample their crops. And environmentalists in the city are like, you guys don't care about the wildlife enough. We need to save them. They're important. And the farmers and ranchers, really, their anxiety comes from having to do a lot of paperwork and having to pay a lot of money. And it's not that they hate the wildlife, but it's an issue of fairness. They don't want to bear the whole burden. So what the American Prairie Reserve did is installed a bunch of motion sensor cameras, and as soon as a wolf or another animal went into the camera, the farmer or rancher would get cut a check immediately. They would get sent a check, and then they would be able to handle it. And so it turned these liabilities of this negative thing of wildlife into an asset. They liked these checks coming in. They wanted more animals to go through their cameras. So that was a really good way to find that middle ground and find that solution that protected the wildlife, but also respected the needs of the farmers and ranchers. So that's like one example of many win-win solutions that actually exist out there that we kind of forget to look for before we start arguing with each other. So what you need to do on whatever topic you're disagreeing on, it could be literally anything, try and search for those win-win solutions, because they are out there. I promise you they're out there. And get to the root of their anxiety first before you deem them a monster in your head, and vice versa, hopefully. Another strategy is to find kind of middle ground, between how your emotional aspect, I guess. So for example, in coronavirus right now, mask wearing obviously is a very controversial issue, more controversial than it should be. And something that Kevin Wilhelm, my co-author, found out in the grocery store the other day was that he was right behind a person not wearing a mask in the grocery line, and the grocery store workers were trying to convince him to put a mask on before he came up in the line, and he was arguing back. This is a conflict I'm sure we've all heard about in the news. Maybe it's even happened to you. I don't know. But Kevin realized this person was wearing a Seahawks sweatshirt and a Cougars, WSU Cougars, it's a local college, university hat. And so he thought, you know what, maybe this person likes football. Kevin really likes football. And so he decided to start talking football with him, and just found that common ground emotionally with him, made that connection, and then said, you know what, if I don't really like wearing a mask either. It sucks to be, told what to do, but if we don't wear masks, then football season's not going to happen, and I really want to watch, the Seahawks play. And then the guy totally changed his perspective, at least his temperature. He lowered his temperature and was like, oh, damn, I really want football to happen too. And then it changed the way that they approach the conversation. So there's a lot of ways that we can kind of connect, and we just have to find them. We just have to. A big thing, honestly, is that you have to want to find them. If you don't go in with an open heart and an open mind yourself, it's hard to expect them to. And so if you go in with that mindset of, I'm going to be empathetic, I'm going to try and understand where they're coming from, what they say is important. What they say is not because they're an idiot, it's because of their personal experience, then your conversation is going to go a lot better. And yeah, that's my advice to you. So hopefully, my hope is that we can kind of build back towards that in America. I think we used to be at a point of that. There's always been controversy, but right now it's like cats and dogs. And so I think that, but I do think that there's more that unites us than divides us. That we have more in common than we have not in common. So we just have to all work together to find that, to reach that point.
That is so true, Natalie. I couldn't agree more. So if you have questions, please feel free to put those in the chat, but I'm going to ask Natalie a couple of questions. So Natalie, there's so much going on in the world as we've been discussing. What has been the response to the book and to your message?
Absolutely. It's actually been very positive, which has been wonderful to see. People, friends, family, and strangers, people writing reviews on Amazon have said, you know what, this is a book we really need, and this is a message that America desperately needs. And that gives me hope, because that means that people are willing to try. And like I just said, that's the most important thing. That's the first step. And yeah, so it's been really awesome to see that.
I love that. So I've had so many situations where I feel or I have presumed that somebody has made assumptions about my belief system, perhaps from what they've seen on Facebook or just making their own presumptions. So how do you recover from that and still have a productive conversation? So I recently had that situation at Thanksgiving not too long ago over a political conversation, and I just could not recover. So please help me and tell me how I can recover from that.
Absolutely. I've also run into those. And you know what, you start heating up when conflict arises. Yeah, and that's a hard one, because that you've passed the point of making a connection before you reach that point. And so that's definitely a tough one that I've thought a lot about. But my first advice is to just introduce yourself if they're a stranger. If just say your name, because that honestly can go a long way. It makes you feel a lot closer to them. If you already know them, then backtrack towards something that you have in common. Maybe use something that you have in common as an example of why you feel the way you do. Because people can disagree with each other's opinions, but you can't disagree with personal experience and kind of history, your personal history. And so if you go back to like, oh, like I grew up here, this is what my dad told me, this is what I've experienced in the local community, then that really gets them thinking, and that kind of lowers the temperature, because you take a step back and you're like, this is where I'm coming from, and you open up before you expect them to open up, which is really important.
So Natalie, Molly asked about how do you do that when it's a family member? What suggestions do you have for her and for all of us, because we all have that situation?
Yeah, I know I do. My family is pretty divided. We've gotten in a lot of email chain arguments, but with the family, if it starts getting heated, you have a really strong connection to begin with. So it should be honestly easier than it is, because you all love each other already so much, and so kind of getting people to remember that, going back to that, maybe talking about an experience you had together and reflecting on that. When that person came up, this is how I felt. Opening up emotionally is way easier with family than with strangers. So it actually can be a pretty positive thing if you're disagreeing with family, because that means that you're talking about it. It's better than it being an elephant in the room. So honestly, perks for even getting to that point of disagreement, and then definitely finishing the conversation on a positive note is really important with family, because you don't want to break up relationships. You don't want to make it awkward. So making sure that once you get to the end of the conversation, you say, I hear you, I see where you're coming from, I respect where you're coming from, and I'm going to think about it some more. So thanks for your opinion. I appreciate it. Just saying something really simple like that can go a really long way towards making someone feel like, oh, I didn't have to like grind my opinion into their head, because they're listening to me. How nice is that?
I have to say that those are such good tools to have in our toolbox when that happens with family or someone, a stranger as well. I'm going to remember that, because I could get a little hot, as we all can. So I'd like to ask you two questions specifically about two hot topics, one of which is the whole Black Lives Matter movement and the whole conversation around race. So what advice do you have around race and how we can have great conversations or effective conversations with both parties? Can you share your thoughts?
Definitely. So race is a very important but also difficult topic to talk about. And honestly, sometimes if someone is being very racist outwardly, it's okay to walk away. You don't have to force yourself to talk to people in every single situation. Sometimes you just have to walk away. And so I just want to make sure that that people feel like safe doing that, comfortable doing that. You don't have to feel guilty if that happens. So that's just one thing. But if you want to try and make it into a conversation, great. Especially if you're not a person of color, if you're not in the Black and brown community, then standing up and being an ally for people in that community is such an important thing, because they can't fight this fight alone. If they could, then it would be well over by now. And so they need everybody to be on board. And so my suggestion is to learn how to be a better ally. If you're going to be able to, because you talking to people can be that bridge between a Black person and I don't know, white supremacist maybe. You can be that bridge between them, just talking from your own experiences. But I would say also being open about your own faults is important. Say, I've struggled with this, or I used to think this and I changed my mind because. Talking from your personal experience always goes a really long way. Yeah, and again, just being an ally in all small ways, standing up, talking for people so that they don't always have to do it themselves, making space for people, even if that means that you're not talking, just saying, I'm going to redirect you to this resource or to this person who is better at it than me, is also a good strategy.
Great. So thank you so much. And then the other hot topic, of course, is climate change. And Republicans and Democrats have really different opinions about climate change. What would your suggestions be to find some common ground there?
Sure. So climate change actually, and we detail this in our book a little bit, but Republicans and Democrats actually aren't as different as we think. It's more of a generational thing. So a reliable study showed that people ages 18 to 38 had actually the same opinion about whether climate change is a real issue. And then once you got to 55 and over, there was a 35% gap. And so honestly, young people are kind of all on the same page about it, which is something that shocked me, even though I majored in climate change in college. So, first being like not afraid to have that conversation, I think is important, because people don't want to tread on that ground. But actually, I think a lot of people are more willing to talk about it than you think. And then my other tip is that a lot of times it actually doesn't even matter if you believe in climate change or not, to work towards sustainable solutions. So if you are, let's say you are on the side of the climate advocate, and you're talking to a climate denier or climate skeptic, talk things that matter to them, like the economy. Let's say you want to encourage a farmer to put windmills on their farm. Well, they get a stable income from that, and stable income is something that we are very lacking in these days. And so that actually helps them, and that's a great solution. And then you get what you're aiming for, they get what they actually need. Yeah, and vice versa. Let's say you're a climate skeptic talking to a climate advocate. They want to have sustainability, reduce emissions solutions. If you want to have like a good economic thing for your city, then you can find that solution that's going to be beneficial for you, and say, you know what, if you support this awesome solution for me, you'll get what you want, and then bridge that gap immediately. There's tons of solutions out there. That's exactly what my company does, is find those. So it's actually, it hurts me to say that you don't have, it doesn't matter if you believe it, because there's so much middle ground.
That's terrific. So last question before we go into some questions from our audience today.
Sure.
But so you've talked about so many strategies today, Natalie, that are so terrific. What are the hardest ones for you to put into action?
That's a good question. Yeah, it's obviously harder to do than to say. But I think the most important thing for me is to remind myself, to be intentional about it, to not just be reactionary when somebody disagrees with me, because I'm kind of a little bit conflict averse. I don't love it when people are yelling at me. I don't think anybody does, but I get, my face starts heating up. I start numbing out a little bit. But then I just have to remind myself, you know what, like, this is a reaction, and the reaction solution, that, the communication that you're going to have is far less effective than the practical one. And so I have to remind myself, you know what, like, even though I really want to just, yell at them back, or snap or walk away, although, sometimes I do that, I need to remember, you know what, if I just go back to these strategies, it's going to go great. We're going to be friends at the end. I want this person to be my friend. I love having friends. So going to that kind of safe space in your head, and calming down is probably the number one thing for me.
I think it's probably just taking a deep breath as well.
Yeah,
and just like, take a deep breath, pause,
mm-hmm.
Be intentional, like you said,
Mm-hmm.
goes a long way to success in these types of conversations, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So Shannon had a question, Natalie. What suggestions do you have when you've attempted to have a productive discussion and it doesn't go well? The person gets angry and shuts down. When, how, and if to resume the conversation for productive outcome? What are your thoughts on that?
Great question. Thanks, Shannon. Yeah, so I really like that question, because it already suggests something that I was going to say, which is it's okay to walk away and then come back, return to it, because sometimes neither of you are ready to talk about it. If it was just brought up and you get heated, maybe you want to talk about it later, and you just say, I'm going to step back, I'm going to think about it, and come back. And the timing is totally dependent on you and their relationship, and how heated it gets. But let's say you give it a week, or a few days, and you come back, and then you say, I really thought about it, and this is where I'm coming from. That's going to be a lot more of a discussion than an argument. So discussions that don't go well, I mean, honestly, it's great that you tried. Perks for trying and acknowledging that between you. Like, I know we're disagreeing, but I'm glad that we're talking about it, is a great first thing to say. Or, when you're trying to return, I'm glad that we're talking about it, but let's step back and I'll think about what you said. If you say that to somebody and then try and return to it, they'll expect that you have thought about what they said, and then they'll have a lot more respect for what you're going to say as well. So honestly, being that kind of bigger person to do that hard work first, is my recommendation, because not everybody, is able to do that. We're all working on it. So does that answer your question okay?
Yeah, I think that's a great answer to that. So Sarah was wondering if some of the strategies that you have talked about today work well in the workplace, and are there any ways that you would move any of those questions differently or answer those questions differently? Natalie, how would you respond to that?
Yeah.
Workplace communication.
That's also a great question, Sarah. Thanks. Workplace communication is a little bit trickier because obviously it's your job, and so you don't want to be, you know, viewed in a poor light by anybody. You also you will have to get along. You have to get along later in order to continue working productively. So it's definitely something to tread a little bit more carefully on. I'd say most of the strategies still apply because they're all about being empathetic, and so empathy never hurts. But I would say that in the workplace, the walking away strategy is a good one, and also I think applying things depending on your workplace to your work as well. So taking examples from in your work atmosphere, being like, when this person said this is how I reacted, or when, or if your company's work, I believe this because as our company is striving to be better at diversity, equity, inclusion, for example, I have felt that I need to educate myself more personally. And so having these discussions is one of my steps towards working towards that company goal, or, relating it to your company, so that's kind of the common ground that you have is working there. And so really using that to your advantage and not your disadvantage, I think is a really useful skill that is difficult, but worthwhile.
Natalie, that's great. I just want to show you this book again. There's so many amazing tips in this book. I highly recommend it. Again, How to Talk to the Other Side, Finding Common Ground in the Time of Coronavirus, Recession, Climate Change, and so much more. So thank you, Natalie, for being with us today. We're so thrilled that you shared those tips. We could all use them. And Monica is going to jump in here and tell us a little bit more about what's going on with Rebel 11.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Natalie,